If dismantling a modern dynasty and winning Super Bowl MVP still isn't enough to be considered elite, what more can Jalen Hurts possibly do? From the moment he stepped into the spotlight, Jalen Hurts has been doubted, dismissed, and constantly dissected.
I owe publicly Jalen Hurts an apology. I was probably one this year who's been the hardest on him. I'll go back a couple weeks ago when I said the passing game's not good enough right now, and I don't think it's going to get better. All he's done since then is have his two best games of the year on the two biggest stages that the game has been on.
System quarterback, run first, overrated, we've heard it all.
I respect a lot about Jalen Hurts, but I think Jalen Hurts is also like the most overrated player in football. All right, that's me.
Yet, despite leading one of the most dominant teams in football and delivering on the biggest stage, there's still a stubborn refusal from fans, media, and even some within the league to put Hurts in the tier he's clearly earned. But that's the thing, this isn't just a story about disrespect. It's a story of double standards, quiet resilience, and a quarterback who's made a habit of proving people wrong at Alabama, at Oklahoma, and now in Philadelphia. He was benched in college, dominates the pros, wins on the biggest stage, and still, the NFL cannot stand him. And in today's video, we're going to go over exactly why the NFL hates Jalen Hurts. Now, Jalen Hurts has been proving doubters wrong the second he stepped into the NFL, but that's the thing, is that this dates back further than just that. Jalen had plenty of people in his corner when he first stepped into the national spotlight as a freshman at Alabama. He had been a 4-star recruit out of high school and looked more than comfortable when he was handed the reins of the Crimson Tide offense during his true freshman season. In fact, Hurts led Bama to a national championship game where they ultimately did lose to Clemson. It was a familiar story in his sophomore season, although as many of us have heard, when Alabama played Georgia for the national championship, Hurts was benched at halftime after completing just 3 of his 8 passing attempts. Tua Tagovailoa took over, led the Tide to an overtime victory, and ultimately won the starting job going into 2018. Hurts then sat on the bench, determined to win the spot back, with many unsure on exactly where his future did lay. The season prior, he was one of the top quarterbacks in his class, but after a year of sitting on the bench, his stock absolutely plummeted. And while in that 2018 season, we saw one of just the trademark Jalen Hurts qualities we would continue to see throughout his entire career. When he gets called upon, the dude always seems to deliver. In the SEC championship game against Georgia, Hurts came in for an injured Tua and inspired a comeback victory that secured Bama's place in the college football playoffs. A matter of days after the season concluded, Jalen Hurts announced that he would be transferring to Oklahoma to play for a quarterback whisperer in Lincoln Riley. And simply put, as we all know, when he got to Norman, he basically revived his career. Like, the dude wasn't just good for the Sooners, he was an absolute sensation. Following up back-to-back Heisman Trophy winning campaigns from Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray never seemed to weigh on Jalen Hurts, who, as always, showed up for the team. 366 yards of total offense and 4 touchdowns against Texas in the Red River rivalry showed he was a big game player and finished up the season with career best totals. 3,851 passing yards for 32 touchdowns to go along with 1,298 rushing yards for 20 scores were video game numbers. The only thing between him and the Heisman Trophy was an improbable season from Joe Burrow. The LSU Tigers also did put an abrupt end to Oklahoma's season in a 63-28 massacre in the Peach Bowl. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, you're probably wondering, why are we talking about Jalen Hurts' college career and why is it relevant to discussing basically why the NFL hates him now? And well, it's because as fans and analysts were just kind of already discrediting his accomplishments in college, it was meaning that he was going to come into the NFL on the back foot already. Sure, he had a 38-4 record in college, but he had played at powerhouse programs. Even in the SEC, you don't lose many games at Alabama. The general perception was that nobody really played defense in the Big 12, which wasn't entirely wrong, but was used to downplay Hurts' achievements in the 2019 season. For Murray and Mayfield before him, owning the Big 12 was good enough to make them first overall picks. But for Hurts, it was seen as a little more than stat padding for a player that didn't make the cut in the SEC. And that's the thing too, this double standard became just even more apparent as the evaluation process began. The 2020 draft class was absolutely stacked at quarterback, with Joe Burrow leading the pack by a considerable distance. Behind Burrow, though, it was tight between Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa, the man who had taken Hurts' spot at Alabama. NFL.com also had Jordan Love, Jacob Eason, and Jake Fromm ranked ahead of Jalen Hurts, making the Heisman runner-up the 7th best quarterback prospect in this draft class. And as crazy as it sounds too, his pro comp was Tim Tebow, with NFL scouts wary of Hurts' pocket presence and reading of the game. Flash forward to the draft, and Burrow, Tagovailoa, and Herbert were all gone within the first 6 picks, each to a team that needed a starter immediately. With pick 26, the Packers shocked everybody by taking a quarterback, selecting Jordan Love, who led all of college football with his 17 interceptions in 2019. Hurts, on the other hand, would have to wait until day 2 as anticipated, taken 53rd overall by the Philadelphia Eagles. And at the time of this recording, as well as I'm making this video, the 4 quarterbacks taken before him have a combined 6-7 playoff record. Hurts alone stands at 6-3. Imagine hearing that back in 2020. So now with him finally in the league, there were fewer teams with a quarterback situation quite as peculiar as Philadelphia's back in 2020. The starter Carson Wentz had also seen his backup win the championship in early 2018. However, Wentz wasn't benched. He suffered a severe ACL tear in the 2017 regular season while playing at an MVP level. When he did return to the field in 2018, he also struggled with a back injury, but his first full season in 2019 was passable, though still far from his best. Wentz's quarterback rating had plummeted from a league-high 78.6 in 2017 to a decent 62.8 in 2019. And it was clear to see too that the injury troubles had severely affected his athleticism, which is where Hurts did come into the picture. Initially, the Eagles did envision him as a Taysom Hill type of role, a notion that was not particularly popular among Eagles fans. Spending a 2nd-round pick on what didn't appear to be a position of need, given they had just tied down Wentz to a 4-year, $126 million contract, it was absolutely puzzling. The team had a glaring weakness at wide receiver and in the linebacker room, both positions that they failed to adequately address in that draft. This meant Hurts started his NFL career not only having to provide his quality despite incredible production in college, but had to win over his home fans and prove that he was worth the pick at all. And well, in 2020, it became clear that Howie Roseman's gamble had completely paid off. Wentz led the league in interceptions through the first 12 games of the season, which understandably lost him the starting job to Jalen Hurts. The rookie then went 1-3, finishing 2020 with 1,061 passing yards for 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. As was predicted too, he was devastating with his legs, with 354 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. Hurts' debut season had shown promise, but he would once again be thrust into the limelight sooner than anticipated. Philly traded Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts, meaning Jalen Hurts was now the undisputed quarterback 1 for the Eagles, way ahead of schedule. Not only that too, but the arrival of Nick Sirianni as head coach meant 2021 would see a complete overhaul in Philly, with plenty of challenges for Hurts and company. He was reunited with his former college teammate Devonta Smith via the draft, and the pair had immediate chemistry. But that's the thing, the season wasn't without its challenges though still. He did have some rough patches mid-season, throwing 3 interceptions and an embarrassing loss to the Giants, picking up an ankle injury in the process as well. When he did come back, Jalen threw 1 pick while leading Philly to 3 consecutive wins and a wildcard spot, certainly not a bad showing from a first-year starter. Except he had an abysmal day against Tampa Bay in the playoffs, throwing 2 interceptions, completing just 53% of his passes for the 3rd worst passer rating of the year, and Hurts' first year as a full starter hadn't quite dispelled initial concerns around his consistency and overall ability. Heading into year 3 though, Jalen Hurts had one more chance to assert that he was that guy for the Eagles. And well, in that season, he had a career year. With a fully healthy offensive line, the addition of A.J. Brown via trade, and a 2nd season in Shane Steichen's offense yielded a dominant 14-1 record for Hurts as the starter. He enjoyed a career year passing the ball with over 3,700 yards for 22 touchdowns and just 6 interceptions. 760 yards and 13 more scores came on the ground for Hurts, who had catapulted himself into the MVP debate overnight. This time around, Hurts didn't let up in the playoffs. He tossed 2 touchdowns against the Giants in the divisional round before coasting to victory against the 49ers in the NFC Championship game, with a rushing touchdown in each game en route to the Super Bowl. Against the Chiefs too, Jalen put in an absolutely legendary shift, going toe-to-toe with league MVP Patrick Mahomes. 304 passing yards for 1 touchdown to go with 70 rushing yards and 3 more scores wasn't enough to win them the game, but Hurts had saved arguably his best performance for the biggest stage. It was a disappointing end of the season, but at this point, all doubts about his ability had to be gone. Or so we thought. The dude was now a Pro Bowler, MVP runner-up, and second-team All-Pro quarterback. The league-wide recognition should have legitimized Jalen Hurts as an elite starting quarterback, not to mention a 5-year, $255 million contract extension. All of those accolades, though, went out the window as the Eagles suffered a Super Bowl hangover in 2023. With a new offensive coordinator, and at this point his third in the NFL, the Eagles offense struggled to replicate their 2022 exploits. While the stat sheet did say he had career highs in passing yards and touchdowns, it is equally notable that Jalen Hurts had a career high 15 interceptions, up just from 6 the year prior. Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni had concocted a painfully predictable game plan with an over-reliance on verticals, which was figured out fairly quickly. For the team as a whole, it was an embarrassing late-season collapse, losing 5 of their last 6 games. Jalen Hurts had also been nursing a knee injury for most of the season, which saw him register the lowest rushing yards per attempt in his career at a measly 3.9. However, most of the nuance wasn't provided in the discourse around Jalen Hurts in 2023. Instead, he was now a tush-push merchant, failing to live up to the previous season and proving that he wasn't an elite passer as his draft profile had initially suggested. The season ended on a bitter note with a 32-9 loss to Tampa Bay in the wildcard round. And just as he had 2 years prior, Hurts didn't show up in the postseason. He had just 1 touchdown pass and was a non-factor in the run game once the Bucs had figured out how to limit the tush push. The narrative around Hurts in the 2024 offseason had shifted. His MVP caliber effort in 2022 was something of a fluke. His success was merely the product of the system he played in, the weapons he had at his disposal, and one of the best offensive lines in football with one of the most unstoppable plays ever. So when the 2024 season kicked off, it was more of the same for Hurts. 4 interceptions in the first 3 games of the season, and it wasn't helping his case. Saquon Barkley had effectively carried the offense through wins against Green Bay and New Orleans, and by week 4, the Birds were 2-2, and it looked like Hurts was on track for a sustained decline. Heading into the bye week, Hurts had as many touchdowns as he did interceptions, 3 lost fumbles, and an 87.7 passer rating, even lower than his 89.1 in 2023. After the bye though, Philly decided to lean on Saquon Barkley in the run game a little bit more, which, as we all know, proved to be a winning formula. 10 straight wins in which Hurts only threw a single interception as opposed to 14 touchdowns through the air and 12 with his legs. Although he had led Philly to a division title, the prevailing narrative was that Jalen Hurts was still carried by his team. He had attempted 30 or more passes just once after the bye and had an Offensive Player of the Year to hand the ball off to. While this conveniently ignored the fact that his passer rating had jumped to a career high 115.5 in that 10-game span, plenty of haters were preying on his downfall when the playoffs did roll around. But Hurts, as always, stepped up when called upon. His 2 passing touchdowns helped Philly pass Green Bay in the wildcard round before a statement 44-yard touchdown run to open the scoring against LA in the divisional round. Jalen notched 3 rushing touchdowns and 1 passing score in a rout of the Commanders in the NFC Championship game, displaying a rare release of emotion.
The throw. Near side, lets it rip. Brown! Touchdown!
That's what the dude! That's what the guy do! That's what I'm talking about right there! That's what I'm talking about right there!
This moment was a big deal as Jalen's stoic demeanor had often seen him labeled as corny instead of being seen as a strength that the guy is truly unshakable. And as we all know, when it came time for the rematch against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, it's safe to say Jalen Hurts had himself a night. Super Bowl MVP with 3 total touchdowns and nearly 300 total yards of offense. Not only did he show up once again on the biggest stage, but Hurts made it his own, leaving no case to be made that he was hiding behind his teammates or that anyone else would have won in his situation. Hurts has written his name into legend, something that nobody can take away from him. And yes, while he does remain underrated in many circles, still not considered elite in many people's eyes, after his success in the Super Bowl, the hate towards Jalen Hurts can only be perceived as desperate and baseless, envious more than anything else truthfully.